Okay, it is that time again, members. Today is this is the day following our the day of love, isn't it? Today is February the 15th, and we want to welcome each and every one of you all. We are streaming live from downtown beautiful Nashville, Tennessee, which would be the district of our dear member dear member Bill Beck. So with that, we are going to turn our attention to the clerk and ask the clerk to do a roll call vote, please.
Representatives Alexander, Beck, Bricken, Butler, Carringer, Chisholm, Dixie, Haston, Holsclaw, Hurt, Jernigan, Johnson, Leatherwood, Littleton, McCallman, Miller, Powell, Powers, Rudder, Terry, Vice Chairman Eldridge, Chairman Kiesling,
Here.
Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Okay. Members, do any of you all have any personal orders this morning? Or this afternoon? Well, no, it is still morning, isn't it? Okay. Well, what a crazy morning it's been for most of us around here. It's been a real challenging time for committees and all that. But anyway, that's that. There was a reason, members, that we didn't. We failed to recognize our staff from last week. We would like to introduce those to you, and let's allow them to first of all tell us their house district number, who their representative is, the number of years or time spent with legislature with us as a Tennessee General Assembly, and also optional will be any family information. We are going to begin to my right. We're going to begin with with our assistant, Mr. Todd Benny. And Todd, you are limited to 3 minutes. Knowing you're going to be limited to 3 minutes. You may proceed, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Todd Benny. I reside in the newly formed District of 92, which is Representative Todd Warner. Been working with the Tennessee General Assembly for almost a year and a half, starting with Representative Brandon Ogles. And so it's a pleasure being here. And for family, it's just my parents and I live in Tennessee, and everyone else is back in Chicago. So,
all right. Thank you. Thank you, Todd. Very good. All right, let's move on to our attorney. We do not have the presence of Josh Houston, but we do have Mr. Matt Mundy. Matt, we're going to recognize you. Would you please proceed, please?
Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Mundy. I reside in District 63 in South Williamson, and my representative is right down there on the end, Representative McCallman. And I've been a legislative attorney for about 12 or 13 years. I've been doing it in Tennessee since 2015, primarily in state and local, and a little bit of insurance. So I have 5 kids. I've been happily married for 14 years.
All right. Thank you. You're very, very busy guy. Okay. Our intern, Mr. Cameron Ferry, he is without a microphone over there, so we're going to allow him time to do that later. But now down to our clerks. Could you all, Ava, we're going to start with you. Could you please proceed? Yes, please.
Yes, my name is Ava Woodard, and right now I reside in District 58, and my representative is Representative Love.
Thank you. Ryan.
My name is Ryan Foles. I'm in House District 46. I'll be Chairman Clark Wood.
Thank you very much. And finally, the man that makes this committee roll each and every week, Mr. Nathan Witt. Nathan Witt, your research analyst. Nathan.
Thank you, Chairman Kiesling. Nathan Witt, my wife and I represent about the prettiest half acre in District 50. That's Representative Mitchell. And the let's see, this is my 13th year with the General Assembly, the past 6 of which have been as research analyst to the State Government Committee.
Thank you, Nathan. To all, thank you all very much. Again, we appreciate your service. Let's begin. As always, the tension is building, the excitement is building. Yes, it's again that this day in history, February the 15th, and we will begin in 1950. And it was on this date that Walt Disney, yes, Mr. Disney, his animated feature Cinderella opens in theaters across the entire U.S. In sports, Junior, yes, as in Junior, the year was 04. Dale Earnhardt Jr. wins exactly 6 years to the day after his father, Dale Sr., won his first and only Daytona 500, and that was in 1998. 1933, our president, or president-elect, I might add, at that time, Franklin Roosevelt, survives an assassination attempt. But unfortunately, Chicago Mayor Cermak is mortally wounded in the incident. And yes, and finally, the year was 1969, a wonderful year. Billboard coming in at Billboard's #1 was none other than Sly and the Family Stone with Everyday People. All right. We will begin now. Let's turn our attention to our calendar. And coming in at #1 this week, also on the calendar, will be House Bill 327. And who will be carrying that? It will be none other than Chairman Zachary. Chairman Zachary, you are recognized, sir. Got a motion and a second. I see no amendment, Chairman. So you're ready to go, sir. You're recognized.
That is correct, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Very simply, this simply allows us to include the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives within our budget if we choose to appropriate the dollars to do so. So with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
All right, very good. Any questions? Yes, we do. Chairman Jernigan, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Chairman.
Good morning.
I've been on the state government now for 11 years. We've had a lot of what I would consider church and state issues come up. Going back to the early days of the Republic and some of our founding fathers and the way the system was set up. I guess my question to you is, do you feel that the bill is, if funded, constitutional, and why it would be?
Chairman Zachary, you're recognized.
Thank you. Chairman Jarrett, repeat that last part one more time. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the very last part.
I'm sorry, it would be why you feel that the bill would be constitutional, and if so, why?
Yeah, great question. And so I'm glad you asked it. Thank you for asking. So I think it's important that when we talk about founders' intent, when we talk about questions about the Constitution, questions about separation of church and state, which, as we all know, does not exist within the Constitution. That was in a letter Thomas Jefferson drafted to the Danbury Baptists, which actually was delivered to them on January 1st in 1802. I think it's important to know what the Constitution says, and then important to understand our founders' intent. And there's no better way to do that than listening to our founders. And so, as we all know, just to set the proper stage, the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, that's the Establishment Clause, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And so I think it's interesting as we have the conversation about separation of church and state, which does not exist in the Constitution. There seems to be this notion that the two have to be separate when our founders made clear the two are completely intertwined. One of the more famous quotes is from John Adams, where he said, that the Constitution was written for a religious and moral people and is wholly inadequate for a government of any other. But I think we can just simply rest on Thomas Jefferson, because Thomas Jefferson wrote separation of church and state, again, in a letter to the Danbury Baptists. It was the only time that any founder ever put those words into writing. And I think it's interesting too that Thomas Jefferson was one, and some of this that I'm going to read is from the Congressional Record, and I actually have footnotes for some of this because I knew we'd have this discussion. The largest church at the time of our founding was at the United States Capitol. That church was established in right around 1800. Final approval was given by the House Speaker and the Senate Speaker, and at the time, when Statuary Hall was finished, it was the largest church in the country with over 2,000 people attending. Oddly enough, Thomas Jefferson, 2 days after that letter was delivered to the Danbury Baptist, he attended that church with the service led by Reverend John Leland that was actually in the United States Capitol. Every president from Thomas Jefferson through James Madison all the way up to Abraham Lincoln attended services in that church. And so then just let me quickly, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be done. Let me just give you a couple of quotes from some of our founders. Chief Justice John Marshall said, "One great object of the colonial charters was avowedly the propagation of the Christian faith." John Adams said, "The general principles on which the fathers achieved independence, the general principles were Christianity." Alex de Tocqueville in the 1820s said, "There's no country in the whole world in which the Christian religion retains a greater influence over the souls of men than in America. And there's no greater proof of the utility conformity to human nature than there is the influence most powerfully felt over the most enlightened nations on the earth." And then finally, I'll just go to the Congressional Record. This is directly from the Congressional Record on September 25th, 1789. Most people don't know that when Congress was debating the First Amendment, the first 3 drafts all contain the word denomination. They did not contain the word religion. The first draft, which was September 3rd, 1787, said Congress shall not make any law establishing any religious denomination. The second, third, and fourth drafts said the same thing. The fourth draft was the final, which referenced that that Congress shall make no law establishing religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And there was also additional notes in there that said the First Amendment prohibits the national government from establishing any single religion or denomination. So I say all that to say that it was never our founders' intent that we have this separation of church and state. It was to ensure that one of the reasons the Mayflower Compact was drafted was because the Church of England and the escape from the Church of England, which directly controlled religion. And so a long-winded answer to say, do I think this violates the Constitution? Absolutely not. Do I think it violates our founders' intent? Absolutely not. And Mr. Chairman, I'll avoid going on and on and on, but I'll be glad to share this with the committee. I've got another roughly 20 pages. You know what, actually, Mr. Chairman, if you'll indulge me one more minute.
Sure,
Actually, I'm gonna
absolutely. Go
share
right.
this,
Continue.
because I think it's important. So in General Washington's farewell address, he specifically addressed public policy, politics, and religion. And in his farewell address, he says, "Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable. In vain would that man claim tribute of patriotism, who should labor to subvert the great pillars of human happiness, the firmest props of duties of men and citizen. The mere politician, equally with a pious man, ought to respect and cherish them." And then lastly, in his farewell address, he said, "Let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to influence of refined education, reason, and experience both forbid us to expect the national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principles." And so again, Mr. Chairman, I could go on and on and on. And I've got numerous quotes here from Thomas Jefferson, many that were made after he wrote that separation of church and state to the Danbury Baptist, but I'll save those for a later time. So to answer your question, by no means do I think this violates anything within the Constitution. And actually, I think this actually would be more in line with our founders' intent, where government can be a great conduit and partner, but government should not establish any religion or denomination as the basis, because that's one of the main reasons we left England, because of the Church of England. And most people probably know that the first combination of church and state was under Theophilus in the early 1300s. And then the Reformation of 1500 is the first time we had that pulling away from the church, from the state managing the church. And then obviously we go to the Mayflower Compact and we move on from there.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Jernigan, follow up.
Yeah, thank you for the thorough response. we're going to go down this route. 1787, when they were forming the Madisonian democracy that they put together. And it was those founding fathers you mentioned, Adams, Madison, Jefferson, Thomas Paine, they were also very firm in human reasoning. And they took it from the Age of Enlightenment, from the philosophers, John Locke, Montesquieu. You had Adam Smith, the invisible hand of trade. And they set up the whole system for liberty, virtue, and commerce. And it was very secular at that time. I don't want to go down that path too far because I want to get off the bill, right? I want to get onto the constitutionality of the office that we're setting up. But there was an awakening of the church in the 1740s. It began to die down when the human reasoning came and played in the Revolution. And then what you're speaking of in the 1820s, the second awakening of the church in the age of Jackson, that they were searching for virtuous people. They thought that was through religion, and that's what you're talking about when he mentioned that it's a Christian nation and in that route, and that was going to be that way until the Civil War. Now, when we talk about church and state, you are correct that it's not in the Constitution, but the phrase is interchangeable with non-establishment. And what's also not in the Constitution is any mention of God. In the Constitution, there's two phrases, there's two religious instances. Article 6, when you can't have a religious test to run for office. And obviously the First Amendment, when we talk about the Establishment Clause in the government not creating a church. But what is in the Constitution is Article 3, which is the judiciary system, the Supreme Court of the United States, that interprets the Constitution. That's their sole job. And when they do interpret the Constitution and they rule, it becomes the law of the land. And there's been many instances throughout the years of church and state coming up, but none so more than in 1971 with Lemon versus Kurtzman, which created the Lemon test. And the Lemon test was set up, it had 3 prongs to it. Now, last year, when we passed this bill, we met 2 of those prongs and we got right up to the line. I think this bill would take us to cross the line. And I can tell you what I think, how that does. So the Lemon test, to determine whether or not it's constitutional, the first is that the statute must have a secular legislative purpose. The office that we created in itself, the Governor's Office on Faith-Based and Community Initiatives, clearly is not solely secular in nature. So that's the first one. And you have to meet all 3 of these, by the way. The second is it's a principal or primary effect must be one that neither advances nor inhibits religion. The fact that we're using faith-based nonprofits whose mission is to provide support and programs on religious teachings meets that prong. But finally, the statute must not foster an aggressive government entanglement with religion. And I think that we make this possible when we start to fund it. And then that's when it meets the 3rd prong, and which I think makes it unconstitutional. And if I can make a crude analogy, is we created an office for religious-based initiatives, and we asked the church and the state to help us out and to fund it. we pretty much passed the plate and we didn't raise the funds. And the fundraising goal was not met. So now we're turning to the taxpayers to subsidize it. That's where I think it is unconstitutional. It's very clear through Article 3 that the Supreme Court had the power to do that. And they've been using the lemon test ever since 1971. So with that, I can't vote for it. And listen, I appreciate what you're trying to do. It's admirable that we're going down. We need the help, but I just want to do it in the confines of the Constitution. Chairman, thank you. It's always a pleasure to interact with you. And Chairman, thank you for the
Thank you.
time.
You're very welcome. Further questions to the sponsor? Yes, we do. Representative Butler, you're recognized.
Chairman, it's not necessarily a question, it's more of a comment to Chairman Jernigan. There are lots of things that the government is not good at doing that these faith-based organizations can do far better than the government with far better results. And I appreciate the response, Chairman Zachary, on the constitutionality of this, and I would agree with your assessment there. But more times than not, especially in faith-based drug recovery programs, these organizations have sometimes 3 times the success rate as non-faith-based programs. So by utilizing some of those programs, we are long-term saving taxpayers money. And so the investment here could actually create a savings and less of a burden on the system later on down the road. Thank you.
Representative Jernigan, your name was called. Do you would you like to respond, sir?
Sure, and I appreciate the comments. I'm not saying that there's not programs out there that are faith-based that are successful. Like you can go to 12-step programs for Alcoholics Anonymous, but they're not paid for by taxpayers' dollars. And when you go in there and you have a chance to skew someone thinking towards one religion or another, or not religion at all, it's not what our tax dollars were set up to do for the public. And I'm not saying those programs aren't effective. They are. Government sometimes can't do everything, like you said. But when you turn it over, there's got to have to be some transparency somewhere with these contracts. And if we can't go and say, to drill down or audit and say, are you providing this service with a non-biased, non-religious effort, then I just think it's not within the Constitution. But thank you, sir. All right.
Thank you very much, Representative Powell. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess just start off with a comment. I guess if these programs are better, that the government at delivering those services, then why are we here asking for them to fall under the government and become part of the government?
All right.
I'm
sorry.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, I
Sure.
guess
Sir.
I want to ask a very specific, moving away from the constitutionality and the historical aspects of separation of church and state. One thing that stuck out on me reading this bill is somewhat extraordinary to me. It says removes the prohibition on a state employee benefiting from the nonprofit partners' activities. Can you explain to me why we are creating this exception in this piece of legislation?
Chairman, you're recognized.
Thank you,
Chairman
Mr.
Zachary.
Chairman. Directly to that question, it was because of the way it was originally drafted. If we choose to if this bill passes and we choose to appropriate dollars, then that office, then the funds to be able to pay those employees would be state funds. And so that's where that would come into play. And Mr. Chairman, if I could just quickly, just to kind of, we've got questions flying around, but currently we have the only Office of Faith-Based Initiative in the country that doesn't receive state funds. All their offices do. And I think it's important to point out that President Obama, through an executive order on February 14th of last year, he created an Office of Faith-Based Initiatives and Neighborhood Partnerships that is literally funded by the federal government, our taxpayers. So we're sitting here having this conversation when President Obama has created that office via an executive order. The White House Partnership Office, per its mission, promotes partnerships with religious and secular neighborhood organizations to work with leaders of faiths, all backgrounds, who are the front lines of the community to help uplift, heal, and rebuild neighborhoods in crisis. And I would point out that our Office of Faith-Based Initiatives has a very similar mission statement where we work with the Tennessee Fosters Hope, volunteer mentorship initiatives. We're working with DCS. We're working with the Tennessee Department of Corrections. So literally our mandate is basically the same as that President Biden has given to his administration. And again, that particular program of the federal government is funded by our federal taxpayer dollars. So in this particular case, President Biden clearly lines up with what we're doing here in the state of Tennessee.
Representative Powell, you're recognized.
Thank you. Just two questions. So, and I don't think I got an answer to my first. So basically, the proposed language specifically lifts the ban on state employees benefiting from nonprofit partner activity. Can you explain to me how that is not a conflict of interest?
Chairman Zachary.
How, ask me your question again.
Sure. So the legislation lifts the ban on state employees benefiting from the nonprofit partners' activities. In this legislation, that's specifically part of the legislation. How is that not a conflict of interest? If I can direct funds to personally benefit my family and partner, how is that not a conflict of interest?
Well, as I read it, this was originally created in that realm. This office works with nonprofits. And so these team members of this office will now be compensated by the state because that's where the funding will come from. So in terms of directing any funds that come in for their own gain, that's clearly not going to happen within that office.
Representative Powell.
It's a clearly written into the legislation, and I think I do think it's a conflict of interest. I think it's a problem, and I would encourage you to take a look at it if this advances out of this committee to make sure that we're not creating that loophole. My last question is, can you explain to me the transparency behind this when these contracts are awarded? Are those going to be made public? Are we going to be able to take a look at that and understand what is going on with these different funds?
Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of contracts rewarded, any of those would fall under the same purview that we have for any contract in the state. But in terms of the office in particular, one of their primary roles is to help the faith-based community walk through the responding to grants, various RFPs and other things. So that's part of what this office is going to do, is help the faith-based community be able to walk through that process. But in terms of any contract, which I don't know of any that the Office of Faith-Based Initiative would directly be the conduit for, that would fall under the same purview that any other contract we have now in state government.
Okay. Next, we have Chairman Ricken. You are recognized, sir.
Mr. Chairman, my question, I guess, is along the lines of just kind of a fiscal side, just in growing largeness of government here. And so, this $1.2 million is strictly for staff in operating this office. Is that correct?
Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, that's correct. Because currently, right now, the way we have originally established this, they had to raise private funds to cover the expense. And again, we're the only Office of Faith-Based Initiative in the country, including the Federal Office of Faith-Based Initiatives, that currently has to raise its own funds.
Chairman Ricken.
Do you have any estimation or likelihood that this office will grow in scale and continue to grow? I'm going to call it my concern with largeness of government. That's all. I'm not sure if you can answer that clearly, but that's my concern.
Back to you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, in terms of, you're correct. In terms of me being able to answer that, I don't run the office and I don't know. And we obviously are responsible for appropriating additional dollars. So if there is a need, that office can come and place that request before finance, in which some of us in this committee sit on. But just personally, I would say that we continue to look to government to solve significant issues that government is simply not equipped to solve. And that all we have to do is look around and look at society the way we're functioning now. an Office of Faith-Based Initiatives working alongside nonprofits, pulling them into situations and circumstances to help resolve those issues is a desperate need. And I'll give you a perfect example. In Knox County, a couple of years ago, we formed what's called the Knox County Pastors Network. It's the 25 largest churches in the county have pooled their resources together, and every year they take on an initiative. A couple of years ago, it was the opioid crisis. The mayor at the time was Tim Burchett, who's now our congressman. Mayor Jacobs followed him, and their request of that group was the same. We need additional resources to help with mental health and to help with the opioid crisis. So those 25 churches, in working with the Office of Faith-Based Initiative when this was established, those churches funded, with the help of the office navigating through to be able to establish that, they funded what's called the Renew Clinic, which is now in downtown Knoxville. And the Renew Clinic does incredible work. And so they treat from a faith-based perspective, but they provide the counseling, they provide all the necessary needs to walk somebody through addiction. Because again, there is a desperate need, just like in all of our communities, there's a desperate need in Knox County to help with the opioid crisis at the time. And now it's this fentanyl crisis, and the list goes on and on and on, to the point that Renew Clinic is expanding so fast and they have a significant waiting list. But that's just one example of this office pulling in the private sector and the faith community to didn't cost the state or the county anything. And the Renew Clinic was formed to be able to help treat some of these issues. And so that's what this office does. And I can speak to the actual results of that office specifically in Knox County, because if you go downtown, you've got the Renew Clinic that's doing incredible work.
Chairman Bricken, follow up? No. He says no. And next, Representative Miller, you recognize, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman, the 1.22 million, that's recurring dollars, and it's actually to set up the operations, the overhead, staff, et cetera, et cetera. Is that correct?
Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's Representative Miller. The office is already established. So we established the office a couple of years ago. So the office is in place, and the office has been raising private funds to cover overhead and cost. And it has limited the office's ability to be as effective as it can be. And so this simply allows them, they can still raise private funds if they choose to do so over that 1.2, if they choose to raise private funds, just like Texas and other offices are allowed to do around the country. But this actually, yes, would come in, supplement, and replace and help cover the cost of running that office, which again is already established.
Okay.
Follow up,
Yeah.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Initiative to provide a sustainable funding source. So the sustainable funding source, would those be extra dollars that at any given point the state would appropriate?
Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That would have to come through us, Representative Miller. That would come before our finance committee, just like anybody else, whether it's TDEC, THEC, whomever. If they need additional dollars, they would come in front of us. But this office still has the ability to raise private funds, because this office right now is working with DCS. And so this office would have the opportunity, they jump in with DCS, we need this, this, and this in East Tennessee. What can you do to help? So this office would have the ability to help facilitate some of that if they needed to do so.
Representative Miller.
Just last question, Mr.
Sure.
Chairman.
Thank
Under
you.
the Office of Faith-Based Community Initiative, will there be no discrimination? In other words, any religion could apply for whatever grant dollars?
Chairman Zach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, it's a non-denominational, strictly faith-based. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Miller. It is next. Chairman Powers, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, sponsor. I just wanted to follow up on something our good friend from Nashville, Davidson County, said. He is very up to date on the Constitution, as are you. I just wanted to mention one thing he was talking about, going back and looking at Article 3 and the Supreme Court decisions. I just think about things like Brown versus the Board of Education, Dred Scott, Plessy versus Ferguson. What are all those have in common? They were all wrong decisions by the Supreme Court. Those were all overturned by the Supreme Court, a later Supreme Court. So just because the Supreme Court has made a decision, we have to go out when we look at something, whether it's constitutional or not, we have to look at the original intent, what the original intent of the founders were looking at, not what a Supreme Court case that could be wrong, that could be overturned later, but the original intent of the Constitution. And that's why I think your bill is a good bill, and that's why I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Your response, if any, Chairman?
No, sir.
Moving on.
No,
Okay,
sir.
well, let's move on to, back to Chairman Jernigan. You're recognized, sir.
Okay. Chairman Powers, yeah, I agree with you. There's been some bad decisions and they were overturned, but it was all done so constitutionality wise. I think when justices look, they look at the intent, they look at the original intent of it. That's their job, is to interpret it. And since 1971, and maybe it will be overturned in the future, but it is not overturned right now. And right now it is the law of the land. It is constitutional. And that's, but I understand what you're saying, but the Supreme Court's not perfect. But right now, the way it is, and maybe it will be overturned in the future, like Roe. But right now, it's not, and that's what makes it constitutional. Just one question further. Representative Miller mentioned about all religions. If one is denied, is there an appeal process?
Okay, no response. Would you like to respond,
Yes,
Chairman?
sir. Thank
Sure.
you.
I'm sorry.
I would rather not respond, but I will.
Okay, well,
Yes,
you-
sir. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm
Don't
kidding.
feel
I'll respond. Yes,
impelled
sir.
unless you
Yeah.
want.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of an appeal process for a denial, unless that's a state requirement for any kind of denial, I don't know of any.
Okay. And my last statement will be just, we talked a lot about private partnerships when the government can't do it. And private partnerships, you know, we've dealt with some of those in the past, and it gets more difficult for representatives to engage directly. I don't know if you ever had to deal with Core Civic, but it's notoriously hard to get information just because we turn over to a private entity. Lord forbid, I'd want Comcast or the airlines to run something for us. So I just would want to make sure that we had direct access, transparency, as we always do. I'm sure those contracts will go through physical review, and they can be addressed there as well. But I just wanted to put that on the record. So thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, or excuse me. Yeah, Chairman's, Jernigan. Chairman Hastings, you're recognized, sir. Got a question called on the bill? I see no objection. We are ready to vote on House Bill 327 after much discussion and enlightenment. Okay, let's go. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, like sign. Ayes have it, and this will be moving on to Finance. Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee.
See you then. Okay. We're going to item number 2. And who's up? That will be Representative Sparks. Representative Sparks, you are in the well with House Bill 72. No amendment. We've got a motion, and yes, we do have a second. So therefore, you are recognized, sir.
Thank you, Chairman, committee. House Bill 72 basically just makes changes to the preservation of leases that are being destroyed from microfilm to electronic and other storage devices. Current law only provides for the preservation of leases prior to disposal by microfilm. Microfilm has been all but replaced by electronic storage of documents. Microfilm readers are not widely available. Finding the correct item on microfilm that isn't an index requires visually scanning each item until the desired one is located. This is a simple bill, and appreciate y'all's indulgence in passing this.
Thank you, Representative Sparks. Any questions to the sponsor? Got a call. Got a call for the question. Any objections to the calling of the question? I see none. Let us vote on House Bill 72. Those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, like sign. Ayes have it.
Thank you, Chairman.
And
Chairman, can I mention-
Rep,
Chairman,
you
can I
are
mention
moving
something real
on to
quick?
calendar and rules, sir.
Can I mention something real quick? The other day, I took a poll about the football game. I do a radio show, so I was giving the announcements out live, and your illustrious chairman, Dr. Brian Terry, was the only one that guessed it right. So y'all give it up for Dr. Brian Terry
Yeah,
for guessing
sure.
the golf game. Thank you, Chairman.
Did you hear me? Calendar and rules. Okay. Now, right now, we have, we want to recognize Speaker Johnson for personal privilege. I think, did you? You pass. He says he passes now. Okay. That's fine. Okay. Let's move on to, on our calendar, item number 3. That is House Bill 313, and I heard a motion and a second, and no amendment here. Chairman Russell, you're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. House Bill 313 is intended to make processing for out-of-state officers transferring to Tennessee more efficient. The bill will allow the Post Commission to consider an officer's training, education, and experience holistically rather than requiring their out-of-state training to be substantially similar to the state of Tennessee's training. This is not reducing the standard for officers because it will consider an officer's experience and education in addition to just the officer's basic training. The proposal will also require additional background investigation and for transfers to prevent officers who are decertified for criminal or other misconduct from becoming police officers in the state of Tennessee.
All right, very good. You've heard an explanation of the bill. Questions to the sponsor, anyone? See none. Okay. All right, we've had a call for the question. I see no objections. Let us proceed. Voting for those in favor, please say aye. Those opposed, like sign. Ayes have it. And Chairman, you're moving on to also the calendar and rules, sir. Congratulations and
Thank
have
you
a
all.
good ride up through the canyon there.
Thank you.
All right, and finally coming in at number 4, we have House Bill 38 by Representative Balso, and I see you have an amendment on here. We're going to ask you for, we've got a motion and a second on the bill. Next, we're going to move on to the amendment, and would you please give us your tracking code, Representative, for amendment number 1?
Happy to, Mr. Chairman. Tracking code is 003868.
That is correct. That is correct. So we have, yes, thank you for that. We have a motion, also a second for the amendment. Okay, any questions on the amendment to the sponsor? See none. Let's vote. Those in favor on the amendment. Those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, like sign. Ayes have it. Amendment is now on House Bill 38. Representative Balso, you recognize, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a bill that seeks to amend one of our existing statutes, Title 8-6-106 of the Tennessee Code. It seeks to add as subsection C a new provision that authorizes the Speaker of the House and the Speaker of the Senate jointly to retain counsel in addition to the Attorney General's office should the need arise. The bill further specifies that the Speaker of the House and the Speaker of the Senate jointly can retain counsel to file an action in federal court for the purpose of vindicating Tennessee's constitutional rights. It further provides that counsel would be retained at no cost to the state. In other words, counsel would be providing the legal services as a public service without a fixed legal fee or a contingent fee. So the question obviously before the committee is there a need for this statute, for this amendment to 8-6-106? And the short answer is yes, for 2 reasons. First, the short answer and then the long answer. Currently, the law obviously allows the state attorney general to file an action in state or federal court on behalf of the state or to defend a case. And that is pursuant to 8-6-101, a statute that this body passed many, many years ago because our Constitution, our state Constitution, Article 6, Section 5 specifies that the Supreme Court is to appoint an attorney general and reporter, but does not set out what duties and responsibilities the attorney general actually has. This body did that in 8-6-101. Also, in 8-6-106, this body gave the governor the authority to retain counsel in addition to the attorney general's office should the need arise, to represent the interests of Tennessee in state or federal court. That is a provision that has been used over the years. In my personal experience, Governor Sundquist asked me once in 2001 to represent the state in federal court on a constitutional issue pursuant to this statute, 8-6-106B. And Governor Haslam also, under the same statute, asked me to represent the state in 2013. But there is no provision anywhere in Title 8, Chapter 6, that actually gives the General Assembly the ability to bring a case on its own behalf should the need arise. And this came home to roost, so to speak, in 2019, when the action that this body filed regarding refugee resettlement was dismissed both by the Federal District Court and by the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals on the basis of lack of standing. Both those courts ruled that although there was statutory authority for the Attorney General to bring an action in federal court, and there was statutory authority for the governor to do so, there was no statutory authority for the General Assembly to do so. That case was initiated with a Senate joint resolution that did not have the force of law. So without ever getting to the merits of that issue, where the state of Tennessee brought a case against the United States Department of State, the case was dismissed because there was no statute such as the one that's before the committee this morning that would authorize the General Assembly to bring an action on behalf of the state should the need arise. So in short, what this bill does is it puts the legislative branch on equal footing with the co-equal branches of government, such that the judicial branch can obviously bring a case pursuant to the Attorney General's office under 8-6-101. The governor can do so under 8-6-106B, and if adopted, the General Assembly could do so under this new provision, 8-6-106C. So that's, Mr. Chairman, the structural reason that this bill is necessary.
Okay.
And then excuse me, then the longer view is that if this bill becomes law, my plan would be to ask Speaker Sexton and Lieutenant Governor McNally to retain counsel on behalf of the General Assembly to bring an action under the 10th Amendment in federal court under the original jurisdiction of the U.S. Supreme Court to rein in federal overreach and federal out-of-control spending, which is a topic we can discuss in further detail.
Sure. Thank you. All right. Yes, we do. Okay. We want to recognize Representative Beck. You're up, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me get this straight here. So does the instance that you spoke about where the Senate passed a resolution to sue, is that terminology in here, or is it just as two speakers that can institute a lawsuit without the General Assembly's approval?
Representative Bolson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Beck, yes, this bill, if passed, would allow just the Speaker of the House acting on behalf of the House and the Speaker of the Senate on behalf of the Speaker of on behalf of the Senate jointly to bring a case on behalf of the General Assembly. It would not require a vote by the full body.
Representative Beck.
Second, I don't see a fiscal note on here. Would these is there no way to predict the legal cost, or tell me where we are on the cost of the legislature bringing their own suit?
Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There would be no cost to the state, Representative Beck, under the statute. The council would be providing services pro bono at no cost to the state, as occurred actually in the refugee resettlement litigation. You may recall that it was the Thomas More Law Center out of Ann Arbor, Michigan, that represented the state free of charge in federal district court and before the Sixth Circuit.
Follow up, Representative Beck.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. Very good. And next we have Chairman Jernigan. You're recognized.
Chairman, my question was answered. Thank you.
All right. Certainly. Okay. Anyone else? Any other questions to the sponsor? And I see none. Did I hear a call for the question? I did. And I certainly see no objection at this time. So with that, we're going to vote. Those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, like sign. The ayes have it, and we're going to move House Bill, what number is it now? House Bill 38. On to calendar rules. Yes, sir. Congratulations, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee.
All right. Next, there is nothing. Next, is there? There is nothing. Is there any further business before this committee? If not, I'm going to entertain a motion in a second. Got it. Thank you. We are adjourned.